Welcome to the 240M Module 4 lecture. We're going to talk about users, groups, and group policy. Our objectives include creating, configuring, and managing user accounts, user account policies and profiles, create and manage groups, create and manage group policy. User accounts represent a physical entity such as a computer or a person. They can also be used as a dedicated service account for an application. User accounts authenticate the identity of a user or a computer and are used in authorizing access to domain resources. Now remember, authenticate and authorizing. Authenticate authenticates the identity of a user or computer. And when you do authorizing, it authorizes access to a resource. So authentication, the verification of the username and password to validate the user logging on is really who they appear to be, whereas authorization is the verification that the user is allowed access to the resource being accessed. So that basically means when you log into your computer, you're doing authentication. When you're accessing a file or a folder or a printer, you need authorization. So we're going to create an account today in Active Directory, and to do that we open up Active Directory users and computers. Then we choose which organizational unit or container we're going to put it into. We're going to go to New, click User, put in the names, initials if we want, last name, and any other information. Now after that we put in the user logon name, and then we put in the password. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're in DC01, and we're going to open up Active Directory users and computers. And from here we can just go ahead and create this in the users organizational unit. Right click, choose new, user. Now notice all the different types of things we can create. We can create a computer, a contact, a group, all these different things. We're going to choose user. From here we're going to call the user test, and the last name is going to be user. Our login is going to be all one word. We can make it whatever we want. Test user. Password, we're going to use the same password as we used for our administrator, but you don't have to. And then we've got user must change password next logon. That's if you want to give everybody the same password and just force them to change it. Or you can uncheck that and it'll last the default 90 days. You can choose to have the user not be able to change the password. You could choose to have the password never expire. And you could also disable the account for someone who's coming in the future but is not ready yet to have their account. Some options cannot be put together, such as user cannot change password and user must change password. It just doesn't work. Because if the user must change it, they have to be able to change it. Next, and finish. So we just created a user. That user can now log in on any computer. They're now a member of the domain. You can also create accounts on the command line. So if I type in ds_add and then put in a user information, then it will allow me to create that particular user. And I can also do what we did earlier in Lab 1, which is the csvde command, and we can import a list of users. Types of user accounts, the user, of course, we just did, an INET org person. That is something for a service to work with, so we're not going to do that in this particular class. A contact. Contact would be used if you were to use Exchange 2003 or older. We are typically don't use that particular software package anymore. Starting with Exchange 2007, they eliminated the link between contacts and Active Directory. So we're not going to use that so much anymore either. Default user accounts that are automatically created are the administrator and the guest, although the guest user is disabled by default. And then computers themselves can also be created. So viewing or setting user account information. So when you double click on a user, we see a whole box of new tabs that we can go ahead and create various different information with. The properties box has various tabs with many different configuration items available, such as the account info with the username, the profile, member of, what groups they're a member of. The Account Options tab allows access to basic user account information such as the login name. You can change the login name here. You can change the display name. You can change in logon hours, unlock account. If someone gets married and you want to change their last name, then you can also do that in these tabs as well. You can do different things such as what I showed you earlier. The user must change the password, or the user cannot change the password never expires, etc. Configuring user profiles. User accounts have a user profile, logon script, and home directory associated with them. The profile stores the Windows environment settings and is used to determine computer and control panel settings for users. And then there's logon scripts and home directory. User profiles contain global user settings and configuration for each user. There are different types of profiles. There's local, which is created by default. There's roaming, which we can set up manually, and then there's mandatory, which is a profile you create and the user cannot change. So from Active Directory users and computers, you can delete accounts, disable, enable, and unlock accounts, rename accounts, reset a user password. You can accomplish the same tasks from a command prompt. User account policies must be consistent across the domain. You don't want to have some people have some policies and others have others. It makes it very difficult to manage. This is achieved by only allowing user account policies to be set from one location in the domain. The highest precedence group policy object linked to the domain container is the default domain policy, which I will show you. Password policies by default. Password policies for domain user accounts and local user accounts are very important in preventing unauthorized access. When editing the default domain policy, the password policy can be found here. So you'll want to copy this information into a notepad onto your domain controller so you know how to get to that. There are 6 settings for password policies that enable you to control how passwords are managed. You've got enable password history, maximum password age, how long before the password expires, minimum password age, the minimum amount of time before a password can expire, password length, by default is going to be 8 characters, and password must complete complexity requirements, such as the default requirements are at least one uppercase letter and at least one number. Store passwords using reversible encryption. The account lockout policies are designed to help protect user accounts from attacks that involve password guessing or other types of attacks. Here's where they can be found. Again, copy that information. You're going to need that for your lab. 3 configurable options exist when configuring account lockouts. How long, which is the duration, how long the account can be locked out, the account lockout threshold, and reset account lockout counter. So let's do a quick look at our test user, go over some of those things. So if I double click on the user, just as it said, the account properties show up. I could also just right click and go to properties and get the same thing. If I want, I can put information such as the address, that kind of thing, of the user. Not very many people use this because they have this in their HR files. Under account, this is the login name. I can change the login name if I want. Of course, the user will then have to change that as well. And if the person's logging into something older than Windows 2000, then they'll have to change that there as well. I can change my logon hours. So I can say when the person can log in or when they'll be denied. I can change logon to. We can say all computers or just specific servers or computers. Here's where I can unlock the account. If the account is locked out, it will say so here. Account is locked out, and you can click unlock account and then click apply. And I can change some of those other options we talked about earlier as well. I can also choose to have the account expire. If I go to the profile path, this is where I can make this a roaming profile. So I can put in a path to another location, and then instead of the profile showing up under computer, C drive, users, here's where the profiles are kept by default, I can have them kept in an alternate location. I can also have a logon script happen, such as to map a network drive. So I would put the path to that logon script here. Under the home folder, we have a local path. We can put in a physical path such as C:// and whatever the home folder is. This is where people typically save their files, their documents. Instead of on their local computer themselves, they can save it to the server. Or you can have the path map a different drive letter, any drive letter you want, and then put in the path here. That's just an example. There's other information on these tabs as well. The only one to be concerned about is a member of. So from here we can add a user to a different group. I'll just type in administrators. And from here I can add them to the administrators group if I decided to. When I'm done, I can click OK if I want to save the changes. Apply will allow me to keep the box open, but it'll apply the changes, or I can just click cancel. Groups are objects that can hold users, contacts, computers, or other groups. Groups decrease administration time and improve the network performance. To create a group using Active Directory users and computers, right-click on a container or organizational unit that you want to place the group. Choose New, select Group, enter the group name, and choose the group scope and type. Again, you can also create a group using DSAdd. So let's go ahead and create a group. We'll choose the user's organizational unit again. This can also be called a container. We'll right-click, we'll choose New, and we're going to choose Group from the list. Now in the group name, we're going to call it Group Test. Now I've got a choice here. I've got domain local, I've got global, I've got universal, and I've got a group type, security or distribution. So let's take a look at that. Two different types of groups. Security groups are used to control access to resources. A resource might be a folder or a file or a printer. Distribution groups are used for unsecured email lists. Again, we no longer use this ever since Exchange 2003 stopped being used on the newer operating systems. It also supports three different group scopes: domain local, global, and universal. Each scope determines the type of objects that can be included as members of a group and rights these objects can be granted. So there is a system that is used out there for domain administrators. It's called the ugly method. Remember the ugly method when assigning permissions to folders or files. Users can go into global groups, which go into domain local groups, or you just specify the permissions. So to add members to a group, you can open the properties of a group and choose the tab Members. Choose the Add button and enter the name of the object you want to add to the group. Repeat as often as you'd like. So let's go ahead and show that. So from here, we've got three different types of groups. By default, the global is the one we want. And from here, we're going to choose security because we don't use distribution anymore. We click OK. Now from here, I can double click on Group Test and I can look at my members. I've got no members. So if I want, I can click on there, type in test. It automatically adds my test user, and I click OK. Now if I go back to my test user and click member of, it shows up with group test. So it just added it. You can either add the group from the user area, or you can add the user to the group. It's up to you. From here I can remove it, click OK, go back to group test, members. Now there's no members again. You can also make this particular group a member of another group. So if I wanted to make that a group of administrators or something else, I can do that here. So you can have groups inside of groups, which is what the ugly method is for. Users go inside global, global can go inside domain local, that kind of thing. So if we go back to our groups once again, let's talk about these three. So domain local only covers the single domain that you're in. If you're in a business that has multiple domains, then you may want to add a user to a global group. A global will cover any domains underneath that that one global area. So if you've got 5 domains, you add a global group and it covers all 5 domains. Whereas a domain local only covers the domain that you're in. Universal will cover not just all the domains you're in, but in case you have multiple forests. So if you have a business or a company that's merged with another company, you may have 2 different forests. In that case, if you create a universal group, it will cover all the different forests. All right, group policy. Let's talk about that for a minute. Group policy is designed to simplify administration by allowing administrators to configure user and computer settings and have it apply to multiple users and computers. Some examples: are going to be such as what I showed you earlier with the password limitations. You can use security policies for account lockout, passwords and auditing, folder redirection, lockdown of computer desktops, define log on, log off, shutdown, automate installation. You can actually install applications using group policy, and you can maintain Internet Explorer and configure certain settings, such as you may want to have a default home page that opens every time someone opens Internet Explorer. Maybe it's your company home page, and the user can't change that if you push that out through group policy. There are two different types of policies. There's local, which is stored on every computer. So every computer has a type of group policy on it, or Active Directory, where you can have multiple different group policy objects. Active Directory group policies are a set of rules that are bound within a policy object. This policy object is applied to an Active Directory container or organizational unit. By default, when an Active Directory is created, two group policies are created. The default domain controllers policy, which affects any domain controller that people log into, or default domain policy, which affects every single computer that's joined to the domain. You can create additional group policies as necessary and link them to Active Directory sites, the Active Directory domains and organization units. So let's create a group policy. So we can go ahead and minimize that, and we can go back into Server Manager. We have to wait for everything to load up, and we go into Group Policy Management. Now, when we open that up, we see our default domain policy, and we see our domain controller policy. These are the two policies created by default. So if we go ahead and click Do Not Show That Message, so it doesn't bother you, if you right-click and choose Edit, now we're in the policy itself. Now, all these policies look exactly like when they're blank and brand new, but the default domain policy has a few different additions to it that you can see, such as the account passwords and that kind of thing. So in those slides that I showed earlier that I said to copy down into Notepad, that's where you'll use it for your lab. So make sure that you go in and you go exactly to where it tells you to go, and you'll be able to find the group policy object and edit it just like the lab talks about. So for instance, here we've got security settings. We've got various different restrictions. We'll go to event log. We can say what the maximum log file size is, the maximum security log file, that kind of thing. That affects just the log files, and it'll affect every single computer that logs into the domain. We can also go in and do things like control panel, personalization, and we can prevent changing lock screen image, prevent changing start menu background. So there's literally hundreds of different things you can apply to a user's experience. So for instance, if we go to printers, we can say various different things about printers, saying yes, you can add a printer, or no, you cannot delete a print job, whatever it is that you want to do. When you're done with that, you can just go ahead and choose File Exit. You do not have to save it. It saves it automatically. And then to get it to apply, you just do a GP update. And you can do that on the server. You can do that on the computer. It will automatically update as well after 15 minutes on the computer and after 5 minutes on a domain controller. So we talked about creating, configuring, and managing user accounts, user account policies and profiles, creating and managing groups, and creating and configuring group policy.